We now know that it is possible for conservative politicians to break with their party leader. Yesterday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that he himself would resign after a wave of resignations within his own government and pressure from fellow party members. His resignation was the culmination of a scandal-plagued tenure that included surviving a vote of no confidence just last month in the wake of Partygate, a series of parties Johnson and aides threw at the height of the COVID lockdown that flagrantly and hypocritically violated his own rules. In the end, though, it was an ever-evolving story about when and what Johnson knew about allegations of sexual impropriety against another conservative legislator that finally did him in. Here at home, former White House counsel Pat Cipollone testified behind closed doors on Friday, potentially about trying to stop Donald Trump from being charged with every crime imaginable on January 6th. That's something former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson recalled Cipollone saying when he learned that Trump wanted to march on the Capitol with his armed supporters. The Select Committee is also gearing up for 2 more public hearings next week. We expect to hear about Trump world's ties to extremist groups who attacked the Capitol. Now, it's fair to say that Boris Johnson's situation seems comparably tame. Yet even after the January 6th attack, and not to mention 4 years of Donald Trump's lies and scandals, that included, among other things, withholding military aid from Ukraine in order to force the country to investigate his political opponent, to separating migrant children from their parents at the border, to reaffirming his support for a Senate candidate after that candidate was accused of child molestation. The Republican Party, as a whole, never wavered in its support. It's important to remember that Republicans were handed an off-ramp from Donald Trump. They could have voted to impeach him and bar him from office after January 6th. But 43 senators and 197 congressmen decided that wasn't the way to go. Instead of pushing Donald Trump out of the party and political life altogether after the Capitol attack, Republicans stood by him. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy showing up at Mar-a-Lago to patch things up just weeks after Trump supporters violently broke into McCarthy's own place of business. So, could Pat Cipollone's testimony provide more damning information about the president's actions leading up to and on January 6th? Possibly. Will next week's public hearings contain more bombshell revelations of their own? We have every reason to expect that they will. Will any of it, though, cause a noticeable shift among elected Republicans away from Donald Trump? I, for one, won't be holding my breath. But joining me now is Tim Miller. He's a writer-at-large for The Bulwark, and he's also an MSNBC political analyst. Tim is also the author of the new book, Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican road to hell. Tim, thanks for being here with us on the show. You know, we talked about Boris Johnson in the lead up to your segment. In his case, his party decided enough of this guy. In Donald Trump's case, his party was handed an opportunity to get rid of him a few times, but they decided to keep him, warts and all. At this point, is Donald Trump just a convenient tool for the Republican Party, you know, to fundraise and secure some of the base's votes?
Yeah, I think it's part of that. But I think that also that the Republican voters are demanding of their politicians that they remain to have some level of fealty to Donald Trump. And the voters are the source of these politicians' power. And that's what I really get to, you know, and why we did it is I tried to talk to the people who knew better but still continued to go along, right? Like the pure Trumpists are not that interesting, but why? Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, they revealed privately on January 6th that they knew that what he had done was awful and that they were ready to move forward, and yet they both came back to his clutches within weeks. Why was that? And what is different than what is happening in England? And the answer is just the culture. What I discovered is just the culture of Republican politics among Republican elites in Washington is so focused on self-preservation, so focused on winning the game, so focused on being loyal to the team that they weren't willing to take that off-ramp and to sacrifice a small short-term political loss. And I think that's what it would have been. They would have angered some of their own voters for a little while, you know, in order to have a medium-term, in my opinion, political gain, being rid of Donald Trump for good, and also being able to stand by their own principles and what they knew was right and honest and moral. And they were unwilling to do that. And I think that it's a damning indictment of the Republican elite culture and the contrast with what happened with the Tories.
Yeah, but Tim, if it's culture driven, then who or what is required to change that culture if it's really going to be that's the key, as you might call it, to be able to explain why we don't see people like McCarthy, McConnell and Graham deciding that it wasn't worth it for them, because that trade-off really doesn't seem to be worth it in value.
Yeah, I've got a disappointing answer to that question, Katie, and that is the way to break it is for actual responsible leaders to be willing to take the hit. And you're seeing this with Liz Cheney right now. I mean, she is blowing up her career over this. You could imagine a situation like we saw in UK where there were 20 Liz Cheneys. They all knew. Kevin McCarthy knew, Mitch McConnell knew, Lindsey Graham knew, Liz Cheney knew, Mike Pence knew. Had they all stood together the way we saw in the UK, again, I think that the base would have been unhappy for a while. But eventually they would have got mad about something else. They would have been mad about Joe Biden. They would have been mad about the fake controversy of critical race theory or whatever. The base would have come back home. But these folks are so desperate to cling to power that is what they're doing. And so I think it excuses them to say that it is not a result of personal choice, the personal choice of these specific individuals in Washington and their cowardice that is really the only reason that is preventing the Republicans from doing what the Tories did.
So, Tim, I used to be a Republican, registered Republican for a long time. I actually stumped for Dole Kemp in college, if you can believe it. But what I call the cabal of crazies, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Matt Gaetzes, the Lauren Boeberts, they certainly do not constitute or look like the party that I used to recognize as a Republican. Is it fair to say that this extremist faction of the GOP has fully taken over, or, because you know how we used to talk about QAnon, that extremist stuff was kind of the outlier? Do you think that faction, that cabal of crazies, is now actually a sub-arm or another arm of the Republican Party? Or do you think it's actually become a lot more mainstreamed and is actually taking over the more traditional establishment Republicans?
Yeah, I call it the new MAGA establishment. I think that the crazy is the establishment of the Republican Party now. You remember Bob Dole, some younger viewers might not remember this. In '96, Bob Dole said in his convention speech, if you are a racist, if you harbor animus, the doors are open. You can go walk out the back door right now. I don't accept any racists in the party. So this isn't to say that there was not problems with the Republican Party before. There always was. But there were leaders who tried to mitigate them. Right now, that is totally gone. And I write about this in the book, how the Breitbart faction of the party has all of the power. And while the establishment Republicans think that they're the clever tacticians using Breitbart to, advance their own political needs, the opposite is true. The Breitbart crowd, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, are using the establishment and dragging them along with them. Just what you saw this with J.D. Vance, prime example. This was a normal mainstream conservative. He ends up needing Marjorie Taylor Greene's endorsement to win a primary in Ohio. He's completely given in with the conspiracies and the mobs. And this is a person who is like a Hollywood executive. This is not someone that believes this stuff, but you can see who has the power. It wasn't the mainstream Republicans. It's the MTGs.
Your book is literally called Why We Did It. And within it, you give some really honest answers about your personal and professional motivations and why you worked so darn hard to help the Republicans win. Tim, do the Democrats need a cult-like figure a la Donald Trump to win?
No, I don't think so. Look, I do think that there needs to be a balance, right? And what I write about in the book and what I have regrets over, I left the party with Trump, but in the pre-Trump era, there was this nihilism. These Republicans, we didn't care really about the issues or what's happening with voters. It doesn't make me feel good to admit this. I'm just trying to be honest about the culture in Republican politics. It was all about winning, being cutthroat. On the Democratic side, sometimes you see like almost overreacting in the other direction, like this earnestness and this purity, I think prevents sometimes Democrats from fighting in the political fight with the aggressiveness that they need to. You need to find a balance in all things. You need to find a balance. You need to have an aggressive political strategy that is within the rules, that is within fair play and within your integrity, but also is aggressive. And calls the Republicans out for what they are and uses the extremism, the conspiracy to your advantage to appeal to a broader part of the electorate. And that's what I'd like to see. You see a little bit of this from the Democrats, but that's what I'd like to see more of as we head into 2022.
In your defense, do you really think you contributed, maybe even in small ways, to the rise of MAGA and Trumpism? Or did you just turn a blind eye sometimes to the foundational beginnings, the hackery, as you call it? Because it seems like it took off like a runaway train eventually, fed by its own racism, xenophobia, and other horrible qualities.
I mean, isn't the answer both? Like, by compartmentalizing what I saw, isn't that contributing? I think so. I don't think it should be that surprising that if I was a key player, and I was in a political culture that was nihilistic, that was willing to work with far right extremists in order to get candidates to win, that put the game of politics ahead of the policies, that someone like Donald Trump, who is a skilled game show host, who's much more shameless and has no norms, no respect for boundaries, would be able to take over a system like the one that I was a key player in. So, again, I opposed Trump in 2016. I fought him. And so I think that obviously there's a category difference from people who went in, but that doesn't absolve us of responsibility, those of us who were a key part of the culture that gave rise to him.
Well, Tim Miller, maybe it's time for the Democrats to either figure out what the rules of the game are. Maybe they need to change them for themselves. We appreciate you being here, and we hope everybody goes out and reads your book. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Steve.